And now, Sunset of Time by Albinocorn. Act 1, Chapter 1. World on Fire, how about yours? All of Canterlot rocked as the earth beneath it trembled once more. Cracks and fissures continued to rip open all across the city, falling ponies and entire buildings in a bottomless maw. With every quake, more of the once proud capital fell into ruin. Tall marble and brass towers crumbled to the dust, while entire sections of the city collapsed, slid down on the mountainside to the ravaged earth below it. Whatever the earthquakes had not destroyed, the fire had seemed to burn down. It fell from the sky like rain, igniting everything it had touched and sending billowing clouds of smoke into the air. Dust and ash already eclipsed the sun and left the sky looking like a murderous shade of red. Roars of thunder could be heard from turbulent storm clouds, circling above the city like starving vultures. The citizens ran for cover, desperately trying to get out of their harm's way. As Canterlot fell into pieces around them, the populace knew deep within their hearts this was the end. The train station had been one of the first buildings destroyed when the fire began to fall from the sky, leaving all of them alone and isolated on their immersed mountain perch. Many desperate souls had tried to run down the mountain or hide in the caverns beneath the city, but when the earthquake struck, they met the same fate as those they left behind. The desperate flight would have proved useless in the long run, as all across the world the very elements of nature, civilization brought ruin upon the world's citizens. Fires raged, the ground shook, winds howled, the ocean swelled. It was the end of the world. I gotta pause here for a sec. If anybody who's on FilmFiction can answer me this, occasionally in some of these fics, most prominently 7 Days to Sunny June, there are little page separations or act breaks where we see the cutie mark of one of the characters when they move to the next scene. How do they do that? I mean, it's a cool effect, and I would love to do that. As a matter of fact, if I had a chance, I would have done this for fall. Sunset Shimmer watched in horror from the ramparts of Canterlot Castle as another fireball fell from the sky, obliterating one of the gleaming buildings of her city. The noble colors of purple and gold were burned away by the torrent of fire. Anything recognizable was quickly burned by the acid brimstone that fell like snow, swallowing buildings whole, defacing parks and museums, choking the life out of the once proud city. The wind angrily pulled its nets at her red and yellow mane as it blew in every direction at once. She had to squint to stop the heavy amounts of ash from blinding her. Around her muzzle was a neckerchief so she could breathe somewhat normally. The rest of her orange coat was stained with dust and grime. She couldn't believe this was happening. Yesterday had been another normal day, just like the day before it. The morning had started out normal as well. The sun had shone, birds had sung, she had eaten breakfast, just like every other morning. Then the clouds began to move in without Pegasus supervision, and fire dropped out of the sky. From there, everything began to spiral out of control. It was all some sort of nightmare Sunset couldn't wake up from. The earth moaned again, and Sunset threw herself against the rampart wall to stop herself from falling over. As the tremor continued, Sunset could hear a piece of the castle collapse behind her, a loud cacophony of noise. The sound of the smallest stone and screams of falling ponies rang in her ears. The images of them falling crept into her brain and burned their visions into her eyes. Pellets of stone rained down upon her and opened small cuts across her back. Sunset yelled in pain and quickly raised a teal shield around her, reflecting the rest of the falling rubble. In front of her, some of the sidewalk reared up, tearing itself from the ground, creating another fissure. Another plume of dust shot into the air as a building collapsed in the distance. The tremor intensified, causing Sunset's teeth to rattle violently. There was a loud, earth-splitting noise, and from her peripheral vision, Sunset saw a column of magma rocket into the sky, like a geyser in the distance. She fully turned her head towards it and immediately regretted the decision. She bore witness to a tidal wave of fire-consuming Ponyville and all the surrounding landscape, reducing into ash in seconds. Sunset slid down the wall, tears pouring down from her eyes. Her entire world was collapsing in front of her. There was nothing she could do. She had never felt so useless in her life. She raised her head and looked directly above the castle, where the dark spear floated, pulsing with black magic and emanating an airy moan. The place Princess Twilight Sparkle had gone to hours ago. It appeared just after the clouds had, and while it had not done anything directly, every point he had deduced it was the source of their suffering. Princess Twilight had flown up and fast into its embrace shortly after her royal dragon Spike, close behind. Please, Twilight, Sunset breathed. Please come back soon. Put an end to this. Half of her prayer was answered. Not a second after she finished speaking, Princess Twilight came shooting out of the black spear, walking straight for the castle courtyard. She hit the ground with a sickening crunch that made Sunset scream in terror. The young mare hurried up the rampart. This is another earthquake hit, taking out the part of the wall she had been standing on moments before. Trying to ignore how close to death she had just come, Sunset had hurried down the steps and sprinted to her mentor's side. The courtyard looked like the rest of the city, a cruel mockery of its former self. Fountains had been overturned, hedges and lawns had been burned away. The ground had splintered and fractured in several parts. Part of the castle had fallen outward, covering much of the courtyard in debris. Twilight landed on a small pile of rubble close to what used to be the door of the entrance hall. She was covered in burn marks and open wounds that bled profusely. Some of them had already scarred over, evidence of her healing magic. Both her wings and two of her legs were bent at disturbing angles, and her mane and tail were a disheveled mess. Sunset reached her broken form and sobbed, Twilight! Twilight, please get up! You have to get up! She took the purple Albinocorn's body gently as she could, while trying to invoke a reaction. Sunset's ears twitched as a yawn, whining sound above her head. She looked up just in time to see another figure eject out of the spear. It was long and slim, large leathery rings and pointed scales. It spiraled out of the distance, away from the burning city, but even as it shrank smaller and smaller to the horizon, Sunset could see something terribly wrong with it. It was missing a head. Sunset wailed as the dragon vanished from view. Her whole body trembled at the loss of one of her closest friends. What kind of monster could do that to Spike? Could do this to Twilight? Somebody who listened to Dark Side of Dimensions earlier. Oh! Her cries of agony stirred Twilight from her conscious state. She opened an eye and asked, He's gone, isn't he? Sunset jumped, surprised at her mentor's sudden unconsciousness. She looked down at the princess and choked up, her voice failing. Unable to give Twilight an answer, she merely bit her lip and nodded. Twilight closed her eyes, tears sliding down her grime-covered face and mourned. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I couldn't protect any of you. She said in a raspy voice. Sunset wildly shook her fiery mane. No, princess. You did everything you could. It's not your fault. Twilight opened her eyes again and looked at Sunset with a knowing gaze. Sunset Shimmer, my most faithful student. Listen closely to what I'm about to say. You can still stop this. You can save this world. Sunset stared at the princess. Beneath her neckerchief, her mouth worked furiously, trying to form a sentence. Me? She asked with disbelief. Why me? How? I'm just an assistant in training. How do I stop this? Behind her, another fireball crashed down the city, causing her to flinch in fear. Twilight weakly reached out with a hoof for Sunset to take. Their eyes met, and Twilight spoke in a low voice. You are stronger than you realize. You can do this, Sunset. I believe in you. Sunset took her hoof, a small comfort against the chaos surrounding them, but a welcome one nonetheless. Her thoughts raced as her being hard, trying to come with grips with everything that was happening. Her world was ending, but now Twilight was saying something and there was a way to save it. And her problem was that she, Sunset, had to do it. Nora's mare was drastically unsure she could handle something like that. Sure, she was powerful. Twilight called her one of the most powerful unicorns of our time quite often. But saving the world was something entirely different. In the distance, Sunset heard somebody scream in pain before quickly falling silent. Every pony will die that way, Sunset realized. If she didn't act now, the entire world would fall apart like this. She felt resolve grow in her heart. She had to try. If the princess believed in her, then she had to do her best. Not just for her, but for the entire world. She took a deep breath, suppressing her fears and doubts. What do I need to do? Twilight gave her a warm, encouraging smile. Inside the star-studded bearded wing in the library is the large hourglass. It's been enchanted to allow time travel, but only to those worthy of doing it. Those with a righteous cause. She paused to let out a harsh, wet cough. Blood spilled out the corner of her mouth. She ignored to continue. You have the heart to activate it and travel back 50 years. That's when all of this really began. If we worked harder, paid more attention, none of this would have happened. Twilight gave Sunset a bleeding look. Follow the Albinocorn amulet. Destroy the Dark Regalia. She broke into a fit of coughs, more as a loud, rumbling noise filled the air. Whatever happens, don't blame yourself. She tried to raise her voice over the growing din. The rushing wind roared as it evolved into a full-blown tempest, creating a miniature dust storms and tornadoes as lightnings began to spark and crackle from the now pitch-black clouds overhead. The dark orb floating in the sky began to pulse faster. A malevolent laugh issued from within it. Twilight's eyes widened in panic and she really sensed its hoof. You have to go now! She urged before coughing up another pool of blood. Princess! Sunset was cut off by maniacal laughter coming from the spear of energy. You're mine, Twilight Sparkle! A single pointed black whip shot down towards the two mares. Before Sunset could realize what was happening, the whip hooked into Twilight's chest, dragged her up towards the black ball. Go, Sunset! Before it's too late! She cried as the tendril hoisted up further into the sky. Her face contorted in pain as the whip twisted inside her chest, crying out in agony. She gave one last look to her student and against the pain, mouthed, Forgive me. Princess! Sunset screamed as the darkness swallowed the Albinocorn up. Laughter pealed to the air as the ground gave its most violent shake yet. The mountain face cracked, and a gust of hot air issued forth, practically sensing Sunset's mane. Now, as he had no time to mourn, Sunset took off towards the crumbling castle, leaping over the piles of rubble and debris. She galloped through the entrance hall, only trying to focus on getting to the hourglass. Twilight's scream and Sunset's Spice's headless body kept flashing through her mind, breaking her concentration. She felt the earth shake as she ran upstairs and leaned onto the banister for support. It groaned loudly under her weight and snapped off, almost taking Sunset with it. She scrambled right back from the edge and forced herself to keep walking despite the shaking. She heard a loud, sputtering noise and looked up in time to see a piece of the ceiling break away and fall towards her. She yelped, jumped forward, reaching to the top of the stairs, narrowly avoiding being crushed. A piece of stone crashed into the stairs, reduced into an ugly heap of carpet, wood, and stone, knowing things could only get worse. Sunset doubled her pace and continued onwards. The trembling continued as Sunset ran through the eastern section of the castle. Cracks formed in the checkered marble tile beneath her. The stained glass windows had long since shattered. Pellets of fire were raining in, lighting the carpet and setting the hallways ablaze. The flames lit at Sunset's coat, eager to wrap their incinerating tongues around her and add to the inferno. With the intensity of the heat, water spells were all but impossible. The only drops of moisture were to be found were the beads of sweat on Sunset's face. The further she pushed into the castle, the more it felt like an active volcano. She swung around a corner and continued her voyage into the inferno. The entire corridor shone in angry colors of orange and red. The heat caused the skin under Sunset's coat to prickle intensely, as if she were being bitten by a colony of fire ants. Around her, the walls continued to crack and crumble as the fire wore away its stability, when the adjoining corridors had collapsed almost completely. Sunset thought she had seen a hoof sticking out from the ruins, but not stuck around to investigate. She kept her head down, but even with her handkerchief on, Sunset was still swallowing gunfuls of hot, foul air. The clouds of obscured ash in her eyes and clogged her throat, causing her to wheeze and gag. The world smelled of burning wood and charred plaster. It was nearly impossible to breathe. Sunset merely choked on what scraps of air she could, spat out excess of smoke and dust. She looked over the burning rafter that had fallen down before charging up the spiral staircase that led up to the higher floors of the castle, closer to the library. Up there, the air wasn't much better, but the hallways weren't on fire yet. Sunset charged through the corridors filled with so much smoke it was nearly impossible to see, forcing her to navigate by memory. She could feel the carpet beneath her, and used it as a guide to help her maneuver through the smog. After stumbling around through the dark for what seemed like forever, Sunset found the wooden door it had been looking for. She broke into a run and threw her weight into the door. bending it to open with ease. Instead, Sunset rebounded the door and fell to her side, a dull ache in her shoulder. She jumped up and fumbled with the door handle, shaking it violently in an attempt to pry it open. "Locked!" she said with disbelief. "Why is it locked?" She began to dance on her host in a tipsy, a sense of panic washing over her. How else am I supposed to get into the library when everything downstairs is on fire? Come on, Sunset. Think. She tapped her hoof against her forehead, blinked, then faced off. Right, magic, duh. A bright teal glow enveloped her horn before surrounding the door in front of her. Sunset could hear a few small clicks before the sound of a large bolt sliding out of place echoed through the hall. She threw the door open and was met with a blast of scorching hot air. Sunset stepped onto the skywalk, rising one part of the castle to another, a howling tempest threatening to throw her off and down to the erupting hearth behind her. Above her, lightning danced across the black clouds, constantly blasting powerful arcs of electricity on the surface below. Sunset took heavy steps across the high walkway, keeping an even pace as she went, slowed by the force of wind. She was halfway to the library tower when a particularly strong gale threw her off balance. She brought her hoof down in thin air and slipped onto the side of the skyway, grabbing a hold of the ledge before she could fall to her death. Hanging on for dear life, Sunset's mind was filled to the brim of fear. She struggled to pull herself safely. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I can't believe I'm going to die." The thought circled over her head, fueling her fear and weakening her grip. The wind decided then to tear her neckerchief off and toss it into the burning streets. Sunset watched as it drifted down out of sight, believing she would be next. She moved her gaze out to the city in front of her, watching his opponents continued fleeing in vain while the mountain bled magma, devastating the remainder of the city. Looking up, Sunset saw the black spear pulsing with red energy, giggling to itself. Her eyes narrowed and a surge of anger rushed through her. "You think this is funny?" she said with venom. "This is all some joke to you?" Her panic and fear quickly fled, replaced by fury and adrenaline. With mighty heave, Sunset pulled herself back onto the skyway, glared up at the dark attic with newfound resolve. There was no way she would let it have the last laugh. She continued through the library wing when a bright light exploded behind her and rocked the path. She swung around in time to see a large cracked spider web from a central blast mark. A roar of thunder drowned out Sunset's curse as she ran towards the tower. Pieces of concrete started to fall. First in small pieces, then large chunks as the bridge collapsed. The cracks reached Sunset as he neared the door. The bridge was giving away faster than she could run. The stone spilled from underneath her and she fell with it, dropping to the world below. Feeling weightless settled into her stomach. She got a small streak of terror watching as the ground reached up to her. "Don't panic. Just think," Mind scolded her. Pushing her fear aside, Sunset turned her head and saw a large piece of stone falling next to her. Idea struck her as she flew herself at the stone slab while lighting her horn. The rock slowed its descent and came to rest in the air with Sunset on top of it. Another burst of magic, her makeshift elevator began to sail upwards, bringing Sunset back to the tower door. She blasted it open and jumped through, landing on the carpet while releasing the rock from her magical grip, letting it fall once more. She took a moment to calm her nerves before resuming her run to the hourglass. She carried on through a few unmarred corridors, ignoring the now constant vibrations from the ground. This section of the castle was eerily quiet. Even the howling wind was nothing more than a whisper to Sunset. Any other day she would have found it peaceful. Right now it was only unnerving. Turning a corridor, Sunset finally found the barred doors to the Starsword of the Bearded Wing. Beyond the steel bars, she could see the hourglass with its golden handles and decorations. Rows and books and scrolls. Under the clouds of smoke, the room was completely untouched. She allowed a sigh of relief and finally making it to her destination, mostly unharmed. She closed her eyes and allowed her blue aura to envelop her entire body, before she vanished with a flash and a pop, reappearing on the other side of the door. Sunset gazed at the old hourglass. The beads of sand trickling through the narrow tube, giving time like nothing was wrong. How could I know it was ticking down the last remaining hours of the world? She put a hoof on the glass and a thought struck to her. Princess Twilight never told me how to work the hourglass! She felt twins of panic as she stared dumbfounded at the object looming over her. She knew a righteous heart would make it work, but how? As she stood there thinking, a loud whistling sound screamed through the air. There was a flash of light, followed by an explosion of noise, and Sunset found herself thrown backwards, slamming into one of the bookshelves. He intensified. From beneath her eyelids, Sunset could only see shades of red. She opened her eyes and saw only bright spots, while her ears rang, draining out the sound of the noise. In front of her, a large gaping hole had been torn in the wall of the room. Flames ate into the books and scrolls, quickly fueling the raging fire. Sunset blinked until her vision returned before she scrambled to her hose and pressed herself against the hourglass, which was still unharmed. How do I work this thing? Somebody, please, help me! She cried, pressing her face against the glass. Light began to shine from the bottom plate of the sandglass. Sunset pulled her head back and watched as the words etched themselves into the golden rim. User. If your intentions are good, you won't be misunderstood. Time will lend a hand. Just say to years, release your fears, and foot the sanding sands. Sunset quickly reread the words fast, leaving the decoration bare once more. The instructions sounded simple enough until the last line. Sunset stared up at the tall hourglass before her and scowled in frustration. How do I flip something this big? The fire spread throughout most of the room now, creating a ring of flames around Sunset. Her skin was prickling madly from the heat, and the fumes were beginning to leave her dizzy. She shook her head, trying to clear some of the fog in her brain. Think, Sunset. What would Twilight do? Something amazing. I gotta do something amazing, but what? Come on, concentrate. I can do this! Sunset closed her eyes, thinking back to her lessons with Twilight. She had to turn the hourglass over. It was too large to levitate. What else could she do? Sunset's eyes snapped open as the lesson came back to her. Aha! Struck by brilliance, Sunset backed up and lit her horn, showing a beautiful ray of blue light at the hourglass. Rather than an aura, it began to shrink down from its original size. Everything compressed and miniaturized until it sat on the ground, no bigger than a book. Sunset scooped it up with a triumphant ha-ha! The ongoing trembling gave way to a violent lurch, causing Sunset to tumble and lose her grip on her portable hourglass. She jumped after it, pinning it down with a hook to stop it from rolling any further. The world lurched again, the earth seeming to moan in pain. Sunset felt everything begin to tilt as a large fracturing sound split the air. The tower leaned forward, causing Sunset to tumble head over heels towards the hole in the wall as the room collapsed around her. The unicorn had nowhere to go. As the room fell apart, she dragged a hoof across the floor as she slid down, catching herself on the ledge. In her other hoof was the hourglass, hanging over the fiery maw. A hailstorm of books dropped from above, pelted Sunset in an attempt to knock her down to the world below. One of the thicker tones had partially succeeded, as it managed to hit the hoof holding the hourglass, sending the timepiece spiraling out of her grip. Sunset gasped as she watched it fall from the mountainside. Her gas started to yelp as the tower completely collapsed, throwing Sunset from her ledge. She fell into the open air, screaming as the wind rushed past her, as stinging her eyes. Through her wiry vision, she took the unfolding scene before her. Not only had the tower collapsed, but the entire castle had been cast off the mountain, falling into the abyss of fire below. Above her, the crack in the mountain face had widened, and lava spilled forth, incinerating the rest of Canterlot. Roars of darkness hung in the air, the story of laughter coming from the depths. Get the hourglass, single thought urged. Get the hourglass and fix this! Sunset flipped over and faced an approaching sea of fire. To her far left, another column of magma broke through the earth, sending bits of flaming rock everywhere. Yet Sunset faced it out. The adrenaline was roaring in her ears. She placed her forehose at her side and pulled into a nosedive to increase her speed. Chunks of debris flew past her as she reached for her only salvation. She spotted a few yards ahead of her, falling next to the book that had knocked her from her grasp. She reached out for it in her magic, just as the rock shot up and struck her on a horn, breaking her concentration and sending stars into her eyes. The horn throbbed violently, causing her to wince every time the pain pulsed. It's really nearly impossible to cast magic now, so you cast the hourglass the hard way. Blinking away the stars and tears, Sunset kept her eyes on the target, inching closer with each passing second. She maneuvered around a large oncoming boulder, time to see the ground far below begin to crack. Lava bubbled up, and her eyes widened, realizing what was about to happen. She reached the hoof for the hourglass that was just beyond her reach. Come on, she said, urging herself to reach just a little farther. Sparks of lava began splitting out from the forming geyser below. Come on, just a little bit more! She gritted her teeth. Oh, fluid just above one of the handles. Right, started from the hourglass to the pool of lava beneath her. With a final thrust, Sunset snapped the timepiece out of the air and pulled it against her chest, shouting, 50 years! Take me back 50 years so I can stop this from happening! Princess Celestia would hear her request. She flipped the hourglass over and waited on bated breath as the magma hissed beneath her, ready to erupt. First, she feared nothing had happened. The Twilight had been wrong, and she had not been worthy to use the device after all. Then, all the sand shot to the top bowl before 50 beads dropped into the lower one. Sunset felt the world slow down around her. The wind dulled until not even a breeze was present. All the sound had died away, leaving Sunset's ears ringing with silence. Around her, everything turned black and white before freezing in place. Sunset floated there, suspended in midair. The only drop of color amongst the monochrome landscape. Bricks and stones were all frozen in place. The fire and smoke stood immobile, all halted by the stoppage of time. She looked down and saw the spout of magma just a few yards away from her hooves. Sunset listened to her steady heartbeat, the only source of noise in the silent realm. She was aware she hadn't breathed in some time. She inhaled loudly, breathing in clean air for the first time in hours. The breath of life seemed to set everything back into motion. Around her, a ticking noise, like the sound of a clock winding backwards, began to sound. All the rains of the castle began falling in reverse, traveling back to their origin point. Sunset followed along with it, body flying upwards as if propelled by the wind. Time spun backwards, working faster and faster with each passing breath. Sunset blinked and found herself standing back in the star-shielded bearded wing in the archives. The fire regressed, spitting out books and rolls of parchment before the hole in the wall repaired itself. Sunset, the unicorn watched as her past selves walked backwards from the hourglass, teleport into the hallway. Reversal of time sped up. Sunset saw unicorns coming and going in and out of the archives. Many times she saw Princess Twilight walk in to grab a book or study some of the ancient tomes. The sky lay above, the sun rapidly blinked in and out of sight. Shadows dancing across the floor. Proof time was skipping backwards. In what seemed like only a few seconds, everything began to slow down again. Color returned to the world, followed by sound. Outside, Sunset could hear blue jays singing mating calls. Her brain swarmed as she tried to adjust to erratic time travel. Feeling her legs, she shakily walked over to the window and out into the glorious world below her. The sun shone with a warm radiance as a fragrant wind blew crisp through the sky. Below her, she could see foals playing in one of the castle gardens. She took a deep breath and smelled the tantalizing aroma of Caroline's many eateries, inviting her down for a snack. There was a knot of feelings balled up in her stomach as she took in everything. She had just come back from the end of the world. She had seen ponies die and her world catch on fire. Yet here, everything was safe and sound and unmolested. It hadn't happened yet. No pony here knew what awaited them 50 years down the road. Watching birds pass by the window, Sunset could hardly believe it herself. She had just seen it. Out of the knot of her stomach, she felt a feeling of jubilation rose up through her. A silly grin spread across her face. I did it! She burst into a faint laughter. I did it! I traveled back in time! She did a small victory dance, soaking in her accomplishment. No pony had done what she did. As far as anyone had ever gone was a week. She had gone back a whole 50 years. She stopped dancing and took a calming breath. Okay, Sunset. You made it to the past. Now, you have to save the future. It shouldn't be too hard, right? All you have to do is, find the Albinocorn amulet and destroy the Dark Regalia. She paused and heard the Albinocorn amulet before, only in passing. As for the Dark Regalia, she had never heard of that before in her life. Don't panic, Sunset. You could do this. Just have to think. She looked around the collection of knowledge gathered around her. That one of these scrolls could tell me about it. She never got a chance to search. As she stepped away from the window, a voice said, Hey, what are you doing here? She froze in place as a palace guard unlocked the door and marched inside looking upset. His patrol partner following close behind. Hey, well, I asked you a question, he barked. He stopped in front of Sunset and scanned her over, knowing the dust flanking her in the hourglass of her hoof. So, breaking and entering, facing property, and stealing. You're in a lot of trouble, miss. Sunset gave down, voice apart in fear. Traveling 50 years to the past meant no one knew her. She was an outsider. She had been found in one of the most important rooms in the castle. She swallowed a nervous lump in her throat as the guards reached for her. Yes? I'm in a lot of trouble.